All right, man. So we got some absolutely huge news here. So Kamala Harris cannot stop surging. We got hit with a ton of polls that just dropped in the past 2 days. We have national polls dropping. We have swing state polls dropping. A lot of polls that are actually making me feel even better about her chances in the election, as in Georgia, for example. If you look at the Georgia numbers, for example, she's finally taken a solid lead. So she was up by zero point 0.2 at some point, but she fell off the wagon, and now she's up by 0.7. And you can just see here, right, with the way that the trend is going, and you can see it's a sea of red, and then we got a sea of blue. She's now leading from 3 different polls, and she's even in a fourth, which we'll talk about in a second. But Emerson is a B-rated pollster. They have her +1. Morning Consult, C-rated pollster, having her up 3, 2, and 1. And then with the Fox News, which is A-rated pollsters, +2. So there's a lot of really great stuff happening with the poll numbers, especially in swing state. North Carolina, a lot of polls, she's down 1 or tied, and she still has a lot of room to gain, right? So it looks like the DNC bump is also happening, but there's a lot of good signs coming from the Sun Belt. From the Rust Belt, not so much, and we'll maybe talk about that later. But this is a crazy trend that I wanted to highlight. So even in the Republican pollsters, now we all know that Rasmussen is like the fake Republican pollster, but a lot of people don't know about Fabrizio. So Fabrizio is another Republican pollster, and I think it's actually maybe employed even by Trump, because I think when I did the video talking about how he was predicting that there was going to get to be an extended honeymoon, like he's like their guy. So he's also a Republican pollster. They're a B-rated pollster, so that's actually not bad. That's pretty good. His poll is 1,500 registered voters, dated 8/28, and we can see there's a 3-point shift from the last poll. I think the last poll was maybe a month ago or so. That's a 3-point shift in Kamala Harris's favor, which is absolutely massive, and they're probably underestimating Kamala Harris's support here. Kamala Harris is likely going to have a lot of support in the national vote, and then you can see Trump is stuck around 47. I'd say 47 is probably pretty close to his ceiling. I think 48 is like his max that he can hit in the national vote in 2024. Harris has a lot of room to grow. I think she might be able to hit somewhere like close to 52, 50, 51. She'll be between 50 and 52, I think, at the end of the day. But this is an absolutely massive surge. To go up 3 points in the Fabrizio poll is absolutely massive. And another one, we have this Rasmussen poll. Rasmussen is actually so bad that they actually decided, 538 actually decided, they weren't even going to include their polls in the aggregator. Decision Desk HQ does carry them. But we can see here the last poll, Trump +3. Rasmussen, a C-rated pollster, very low. 1879 likely voters, 828. They have Trump +2, 48-46, which is obviously hilarious. I would be honestly kind of surprised if he was even able to hit 48% in the national vote. Last time back in 2020, he only received I think close to 47%. Biden, I think, got like 51.3. But the idea that he's up to in the national vote is absolutely hilarious. But again, it's a Republican pollster. But they can't even seem to get agreement from the other Republican pollsters who are like, hey, actually Harris is leading. So they're a higher rated pollster and they have her actually leading. So, but nonetheless, it's still shifting in her favor, right? It's gone from Trump +3 to Trump +2, right? So even in the Republican pollsters, they can't hide this effect. Obviously, these numbers are fake. It's obviously not down 2. And we can even just look at the other Republican Trump pollster that's literally rated higher. It's like, yeah, Harris is winning, right? And so what we can see is, here's the Rasmussen trend, right? So I think I showed this in a previous video as well. I thought I'd bring it back up. So on 7/24, they had Trump +7. On 7/31, they had Trump +5. Then on 8/14, Trump +4. And then today, Trump +3. So we can just see that there's this continued movement. And now it's +2, right? So it's gone from 7, 5, 4, 3 to now 2 points. So that's the trend here. We have like this, a decreasing monotonic sequence, right? And so, if it's bounded, we can prove it's convergent, right? With the monotonic, convergence theorem, bounded convergence sequence theorem, right? So really, really crazy. You can't even hide it. And then we have this other huge poll that came out with swing state numbers from Spry S. It's a shit tier pollster, C-rated. It's a red pollster, though. It's a red pollster. 3,000 likely voters, dated 8/20. So it's actually pretty old now. This is actually pretty old because there's so much that's happened. I think there's some DNC boost impact going on in a lot of these polls as well. But this is super interesting here. So they have Wisconsin at Harris +3, Pennsylvania Harris +1, North Carolina is a tie already, which is crazy. The fact that North Carolina is already tied is crazy. Georgia also at a tie, which is crazy. And then they have Arizona at just Trump +1. So we don't have any prior numbers for these for the SPRY. I think SPRY has their newest numbers now. But I would say, for example, I think the Wisconsin lead and the Pennsylvania lead are actually much worse than North Carolina and Georgia and Arizona numbers. The reason why I say that is because if we actually go back and take a look exactly at what happened back in 2020, what ended up happening was in 2020, the state of Georgia, for example, Biden is leading by 1.2 in the aggregate on election day, and he actually ends up winning by 0.2. So the polls were only off by margin by 1%. And the Emerson poll right now that's out right now, Emerson, they actually had a poll here that had almost exactly perfect on the money. They actually have Harris up by 1 right now. And you can see it right here, 49-49, Trump +1. They barely missed it, right? Barely, but it's both 49-49. It's crazy close. They now have Harris up. But for example, in a state like Michigan, for example, right? Biden is up 7.9. He wins by 2.8. So they were off by 5.1 points. So to win Michigan, you want to be up by 5.1 in the polls, assuming the errors hold. The errors were even worse back in 2016. And then here in Wisconsin, this is the criminal one, plus 8.4 for Biden in Wisconsin. He wins by 0.7. So there's a 7.7 polling error. So if you're only up by 3 in Wisconsin, it's not so great. That's why if you look at these current trends, she's up 3.6, which is pretty low. Another very suspicious thing about Wisconsin that I think is them just having really bad polling is that somehow we could take a look at the current Michigan average, right? The current Michigan average is plus 3 points, and then Wisconsin is 3.6. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who thinks that Wisconsin is actually bluer than Michigan. Michigan went by 2.8, Wisconsin going by 0.7. It's almost 4 times, right? Almost exactly 4 times. And, in 2016, I think it was like Wisconsin was 0.7, and then Michigan was like 0.23. So obviously there's a sign that Wisconsin polling is just really bad. Pennsylvania, on the other hand, not as bad. So, she's up 1.8 in the polls, which actually isn't bad because she's only at about, if you want to win, you're slightly beneath 2 points away from where you want to be. Biden was up 4.7 and he won by 1.2 in Pennsylvania. So you're actually not as far from Pennsylvania from the other one. So I think we should take into account those kinds of polling errors. The benefit of when you see Arizona +1, Biden was up 2.6. He wins by 0.3. So it's only an error of 2.3 as opposed to an error of 5 points. And the other thing that makes it more difficult too is if you're talking about a state like Michigan, if you're already up 3.3, let's say 3 points, it's probably harder to get from +3 to 0.7, +5 or +7 than it is to go from -1 to +2 or +2.5. And then also, in addition to these kinds of polling error things, there's also really good fundamentals. I call them fundamentals. You have historical trends. We can take this historical trend with the Georgia, for example. Hillary losing by about 6. I would say more so 7 or 8 with Gary Johnson in there, with him being out. Joe Biden wins by 0.2, so a big trend shift, right? And we know that, even the Hispanic population in the state of Arizona, for example, is actually more progressive than other Hispanic populations. There's a huge turnout of young voters that's going to happen as well. Polls are going to miss them. So the fundamentals are, I think, a lot stronger in these Sunbelt states compared to the other ones. So you might see a tie in Georgia and say, oh, hey, well, Harris +3 in Wisconsin is better, but really the polling error was 7.7 in Wisconsin. So that means she's off by 4.7, whereas in Georgia, she's only off by 1, right? Because Biden was up 1.2, so it's much, much closer in terms of a polling error, off by 1.2, right? Much, much closer. And then the fundamentals, I think, are going to showcase themselves harder core in those states. And because people feel like they're voting for something, it's going to be different. And this Quinnipiac poll has Kamala Harris up 1. I believe the previous poll. So it's just a 3-point shift towards Harris since last month for the Quinnipiac numbers. So, maybe we can check these out here for the Quinnipiac numbers as well. So this Quinnipiac +1 and +2 for the, for the Quinnipiac numbers. I don't know if we can, go ahead and find the previous Quinnipiac numbers. But it looks like a shift going on for Kamala Harris, even in the Quinnipiac numbers as well. So big deal in terms of what's happening here in terms of even the Quinnipiac numbers. They're not a Republican pollster, but they're also showing a shift. So Kamala Harris is continuing to shift, and I think it's really, really powerful to see the Sunbelt shift. Is making me feel a lot better because we can just see, even if we look at the Georgia numbers, for example, there's a clear tide shifting, right? Just look at this. I mean, look, There's a sea of red followed by a sea of blue. And she's officially taken the largest lead that she has so far. 3 different pollsters with 3 different grades, all saying that she's leading. And all she needs to be up by is about 1, maybe even less than Biden, because Biden overperformed his numbers, right? On election day, he's polling at, he's polling at, 48.6, I believe it was. Yeah, so 48.6. He ends up overperforming by 0.9. I think Kamala Harris, unless she's polling so high, there's not really any room for any overperformance. I think she's going to do even better. So really, really huge news. Even in the Republican polls, she's surging.